Hi everyone, my name's Matt Williams. I'm a politics tutor at the University of Oxford and I'm also what's known as the Access Fellow at Jesus College. I would like to ask you a simple question. Do you think for yourself? Now, it's a potentially quite deep philosophical question to which the likely answer is no, because all of our thoughts are mediated through various filters, not least of which is the language by which we structure our thoughts. And that language is of course handed down to us from parents, family, society, etc. So all of our thoughts are to a certain extent founded on other people's thoughts. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But there are certain ways by which we can assert our own individuality over the thinking process. We can be more analytical thinkers and less derivative, more creative, more free thinking, and less part of a group think mentality, okay? And as with any skill, like cooking or basketball, you can improve. You can take what you already have and you can augment it. You can make yourself stronger at it. And I'm going to give you some very basic tips today, and as part of a series of mini videos about thinking skills that I'll be running for the next few weeks, okay? Now, the first thing to note is that when people think of Oxford and Cambridge students and students at other prestigious universities, sometimes the thing that springs to mind is that they are highly knowledgeable, and perhaps the more disdainful way of putting it is that they are know-it-alls. Now, actually, I think a more helpful way of thinking about the mental firing of an Oxford student is a think-it-all rather than a know-it-all. Because when we are interviewing prospective students, we're not looking for people that have an enormous repository of factual knowledge. We're looking for people that can analyse problems, that can deconstruct something that is unfamiliar to them and come up with a novel or unique solution. And the reason for that is simple. If you simply have a store of knowledge, then you are inevitably stuck in the past. You will be inevitably trying to solve future problems based on derivative thinking of how similar problems were solved in the past. And that can work, but sometimes the sort of problems that we'll be encountering will be so unique, with so many different variables, with such a sort of weird concoction of forces, that it takes a really creative thinker to try and solve it. And like I say, that is a skill that can be taught and learned. It's nothing to do with IQ. This is not some sort of genetic endowment that you were born with and you will die with. This is something that you can practice and augment. And actually, it's a lot more simple than you might think, because what I would advocate is that you regress to a preschool mentality, to something akin to a toddler or a young child. And I'll tell you exactly how to do it with a simple example. But before I do so, I want to just very quickly get into some of the basic neuroscience around this. A lot of what happens when you are asked a question or you're confronted with a puzzle is that your brain, through years of socialization by schooling and quizzes and tests and what have you, automatically tries to retrieve what you think is the relevant data. You're perhaps in a situation of some sort of power asymmetry, maybe with a teacher or a professor, and you think that person wants some specific knowledge from you, and therefore you almost automatically dig out what you think is the most relevant information. Now that's fine, but again, that is quite derivative thinking. You're not thinking for yourself, you're thinking on behalf of the wider community. So how can you check that temptation to just allow your brain to blurt out what's going on? Well, what's happening is that when you're thinking quickly, then you're utilising what is sometimes said fairly anecdotally to be muscle memory. And what, in more technical terms, that is that there are alpha waves firing in your prefrontal cortex of the brain. What you want to do is to try and engage beta waves. Now, if any of you drive, you'll know, broadly speaking, what I mean. When you learnt to drive, you had to really concentrate, you had to sort of work out where your hands were, what your feet were doing with the pedals, and after a while, it became familiar and you basically stopped thinking about it. That's when you're initially using beta waves to really concentrate about what you're doing, to make sure that all of your limbs are in concert, and then once you've got it down pat and it's muscle memory, that's when the alpha waves take over. The thing is that through schooling, similar things happen, but with problem solving. You start to get so familiar with the sorts of problems that come up and the sorts of information that you think you're expected, that you lapse into a degree of just automation when it comes to try and solve problems. And what you need to do is to check that, to realise what's going on, and to slow your thinking pace down. Really good book to start you off on this journey would be Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He talks through in vastly greater detail than I'm capable of here, the different forms of cognition and how quickly people basically blurt out answers that they think they're expected to provide without actually allowing themselves the chance to engage their brains as much as they perhaps could. Okay, so that's one of the first things to think about. Now, let's start with a basic diagnostic, and please don't in any way feel ashamed about anything that I'm talking about here. This is absolutely 100% common. This is just a skill that people need to learn, and if you haven't learned it, for goodness sake, it's not your fault. But some people, especially more advantaged people, often get this sort of training and therefore are often slightly more successful when it comes to applying to universities like Oxford. And I just want to share the secret with everyone so that you all get a chance to practice it. Okay, anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up in front of you a very familiar image, and I want you to just observe it, just look at it and think about it and reflect on what your brain's doing. Engage in a little bit of metacognition. What's going through your mind as you look at these data that are in front of you? Okay, you might want to pause the video for a bit, just see what you see. Okay, no trickery here, just make some observations about what you're looking at on the screen. Okay, now this is of course the American flag, and so chances are that you will have a certain repository of knowledge about this very familiar symbol. So it may be that, say, if you're watching from the United States of America, that you have certain strong emotional attachment, nostalgic feelings about it. It might remind you of warm summers on the 4th of July celebrating independence. It might remind you of the story of Betsy Ross and the development of the flag back in the 18th century. You may, if you're not from the US, at least be aware that it has a specified number of stars and stripes that has significance relating to the federal structure of the United States of America. 50 stars for each of the states, 13 stripes for each of the 13 original colonies. So there are certain facts that you probably know that you're sort of tempted to release as significant observations. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those facts, any of that knowledge. It's all, broadly speaking, correct, it's interesting, it's useful. The thing is that it's also not your own. You're not thinking for yourself, and if you want to contribute something fresh to the debate, you need to give your brain a chance to engage more with the material, to make some unique and creative observations. And so you need to slow everything down. Okay? And you need to regress your mind back to a preschool toddler sort of toddler mindset. Now, what do I mean by a toddler mindset? Well, toddlers are not socialized by rigorous schooling, and they are incredibly curious. So they ask lots of very deep, profound, curious questions about the world and the universe around them. Why is the sky blue? Why am I not allowed to spit on the floor in here? Why can't I watch TV and eat chips all day, every day, right? These are actually, when you're confronted with them, remarkably good questions. It's just as adults, we kind of get ashamed to ask them, okay? Now, if you were a toddler looking at the American flag for the first time, you would not know anything about the received wisdom. You would not know the set of facts that you're supposed to know. So you will just ask perceptive questions about the data, and you will take nothing for granted. All of the details will be fresh, and you'll be asking some fantastic questions. And it's through asking fantastic questions that we deepen our analysis. We go from just delivery of knowledge to development of knowledge, because we're analysing a problem in its own terms, and we're actually seeing it for ourselves for the first time. Now, I have some practical experience of this because I showed an American flag to my 4-year-old son, Teddy, and I asked him what he saw. I didn't tell him anything about it. Of course, he didn't know it was the American flag because he didn't even know what America was at that stage. He just asked a lot of fantastically good questions. He asked me, first of all, what is it? Which is a great start. I told him it was a flag. He asked me then, well, what's a flag and what's it for? Amazing question, right? Why do we still have cloth flags in the 21st century? You know, we're not in a sort of illiterate 15th century navy. Why do we still need these cloth flags? They're very important. I feel attached to flags myself, but why? Where's that coming from? These are some great questions. This is allowing us to analyse the problem. We're not just looking for stores of information, we're analysing the problems. Then Teddy asked me, why is it those colours? Why is it red, white and blue? Fantastic question, right? And of course, once you frame a brilliant question like that, you can then go and start to try and find some answers to it. Of course, trust yourself. Try and work out, well, why might it be those colours? Okay? It may be interesting to note that there is only one UN nation which doesn't have red, white or blue in its flag. So it seems that those colours are quite customary. We're quite used to seeing them in flags and perhaps expect it. It could be that they have some sort of symbolic significance within the American flag. They were, after all, the colours of Republican France and the Netherlands at the time that the US flag was produced, so there could be some sort of historical symbolic significance. It could be that there was an awful lot of blue and red dye knocking around once the Brits had been kicked out. So, there's all sorts of possible theories, but the thing is, if you don't ask the question, you're not going to think them through. Now then Teddy asks, why is it that shape? Why is the flag rectangular? Amazing question, right? And when you start to think about it, you'll notice that there are very few countries in the world that don't conform to that habit of having that particular shape. So again, there's a sort of keeping up with the Joneses mentality that our country's flag has to look, broadly speaking, like everyone else's. So why is that? Why do the Swiss and the Nepalese have different shaped flags, whereas everyone else has a rectangle? And what's useful about a rectangle? Probably something to do with physics. If you imagine something in context waving in the breeze, a rectangle could be a particularly efficient shape for capturing wind and also being able to communicate the data across a very far distance. So it could be something to do with that. Who knows? Then Teddy pointed out the stars. Now, he noticed that the stars on the flag are pointy, but he wasn't quite sure why. Now, he then, with a bit of help from me admittedly, noticed that it had 5 points. So the stars are 5 pointed and that they're all sort of geometrically aligned and spaced out equally. Now that is, again, a fantastic observation that most adults miss. And with a little bit of sort of just extra thought, you would perhaps notice, and this would require a bit of knowledge, but you would notice that not only does the American flag have 5 pointed stars, but so too does the Chinese flag, so too does the Libyan flag, so too does the Angolan flag. There are lots of countries around the world that utilize the same symbol. And that begs the question as to why, because stars might twinkle in the night sky, but they don't have points and they don't have 5 equally spaced points. So this is a really interesting question about where the symbol of a star comes from. And now we're getting into sort of the realm of analysis and problem solving and thinking that most people just don't get to when looking at the American flag. And with a bit of research, you would find out that the star with 5 points is the Egyptian hieroglyph, and so we have something akin to a Babel towering, crashing, shared knowledge of what stars look like thanks to Egyptian culture, right? And this is something that, again, most people just tend to ignore. Then we can think about, now this didn't come from Teddy, but this is just sort of further me sort of, vicariously thinking through here, thinking if I was a toddler and I was asking lots of foundational questions, not taking anything for granted, what would I ask? I might ask, why is the blue field with the stars in the top left corner? I don't know the answer to that. I suppose it could be something to do with the way that Europeans tend to read text, is that we start at the top left, so our eyes sort of naturally gravitate up there and then move downwards. So if America had been founded by people that read their languages the other way, that the stars might be in a different orientation on the flag. Who knows? It's also interesting to note that there are stripes at all. Not only what do the stripes symbolize, but why stripes? Now, I found out to my absolute fascination recently that the stripes not only symbolize the 13 original colonies, but also the feeling of imprisonment within a tyrannical regime, that the British Empire was a tyranny, and that in those days and for a long time thereafter, prisoners wore striped uniforms to demark them as kept individuals in bondage. So that I thought was incredible, and I would not have missed that detail if all I'd been fixated on was, what do people want to know about the flag? What do I have to tell them in order to seem knowledgeable? I have to tell them it's got 50 stars, I've got to tell them it's got 13 stripes. But if you're the sort of person that says, well, hang on a minute, why is it even rectangular? And why is it red, white and blue and not brown, mauve and neon pink? And why are the stripes horizontal, and why have stripes at all? And why is there a blue field on it? And why do the stars have 5 points? And why? Asking better questions leads to much better analysis, much better deconstructive thinking. And all it takes is thinking a little bit more slowly, thinking more perceptively, allowing your brain to engage, and allowing that inner toddler, that inner child, to romp around and just think with enormous curiosity about this fascinating set of data that we are so familiar with that we frankly take it for granted. So just to end this, to think more for yourself, start by thinking more like a toddler, Also emphasize how important it is to think for yourself. If you want to solve problems in your life or in society, you can't just come at it with a set of knowledge. You have to be willing to create knowledge. And to create knowledge, you need to be able to deconstruct, unpack, and analyze a problem for yourself, not just for somebody else's benefit. So don't try and think, what's the answer they want from me? Try and think of, what's the question I want to ask? And you'll be well on your way to asking and answering more important, more fundamental questions, and therefore well on your way to studying and learning and creating knowledge at universities like Oxford. I hope this has been helpful. Do of course put some comments down below if you want me to answer anything. Do get in touch. Very happy to answer any questions you may have about this topic or Oxford or whatever. Thank you so much for watching. All the best. Bye now.